Okay, YouTube says that we are now broadcasting live for another Tech Talk. This topic today was one that was requested by a few different people in a few different channels mentioned doing something about student Chromebook use. Noticing that more and more students are using Chromebooks and realizing that there are some potential roadblocks when it comes to Chromebook use. So I put together a pretty straightforward little presentation about this. We'll talk about some of the benefits and some of the downfalls and some of the things that you can do as an instructor to deal with some of those issues, and then whatever else comes up as part of the conversation. So let me share my screen, or a portion of my screen at least. Let's see if this works. Share. Okay, can you see my lovely picture of a Chromebook there?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. All right, so Chromebooks. Prior to this session, I asked IT if they had any numbers or analytic data about what platform our students are using, and I haven't heard back from them yet. Maybe I'll hear that in the future and we can integrate that information later. So I don't have like specific numbers or percentages of how many of our students are using Chromebooks as their primary device, but anecdotally, we know that a lot of them use it. At my previous institution, before I came to CCS, we did have some analytic data there, and we found that 25 to 30% of our students at that campus use a Chromebook as their primary computer, as their primary device for school and for online learning. About 15% on Apple products, and the rest on Windows. So that, at least in that environment, that was a pretty big number. I don't know if the percentage for CCS is that high or not. It might be. My suspicion, just gut instinct, would be probably about 20–25% of our students use Chromebooks. Might be more than that. So that's a significant number. And the question I would ask is, why do so many people use Chromebooks? Well, this is why. This magic number right here. If I go on Amazon and I search for laptops for sale, the cheapest laptop you can find that is current new device is this Samsung Chromebook for $190. You cannot find a decent Windows laptop for anywhere near that price. You can maybe find like a super low end like Windows netbook for maybe $200 or so, but they are so underpowered that they're basically unusable. And certainly any more useful Windows or Apple device is going to be hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. Or a student can go on Amazon, or they can go to Walmart or Target or any local electronics store, and they can get a Chromebook for easily less than $300, sometimes less than $200. So that's the main reason we know students are buying Chromebooks, right? Is they are cheap, they are readily available. They're also usually pretty small, so they easily fit in your backpack or your purse or your laptop case. They have pretty good battery life. I actually have an older model of one of these. I have one that's maybe 4 years old now, Chromebook, and it gets about 10 hours of battery life, which is pretty good compared to a lot of Windows laptops, especially more inexpensive Windows laptops. Maybe get 5 or 6 hours of battery life if you're lucky. Sometimes less than that. So that's why so many students are using Chromebooks, is they are cheap. They are cheap and they are readily available. Nick, were you? Yeah, it looks like you were putting something in the chat.
Oh yeah, just a comment. A lot of K through 12 uses Chromebooks now in computer cards, so seeing a lot more students use them just because of familiarity.
Definitely, yeah. A lot of public schools, K-12 schools, are one-to-one Chromebook schools, which means if you are an enrolled student, they give you a Chromebook. They check it out to you for the year, and you have that, and that is your device. So yeah, increasingly we have students, running start students, fresh out of high school students coming to college, and they're used to using Chromebooks. They might even already have one from K-12, or if they just had a school one from K-12, if they're already familiar with it and comfortable, they might go out and buy their own. So yes, Chromebooks, we are seeing more and more of them. I expect that trend to continue. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. But Chromebooks are different. They are not the same as a Windows laptop or a MacBook or something like that. Essentially, a Chromebook is a terminal. It's not a computer. Back in the old days, when a computer was a huge machine that took up a room, had infrastructure around it, you had these smaller devices called terminals, which were basically just a monitor and a keyboard that you use to connect to the real computer. And Chromebooks are kind of going back to that model a little bit. They are standalone devices. They can do some things on their own, but the vast majority of what they're designed for is just accessing the internet. So the operating system of a Chromebook is mostly just a web browser. It's mostly just the Google Chrome web browser. It has some other things you can do on the machine itself. It has a very, very simple file structure that you can use, but the local storage is usually very, very low. This one here has 16 gigabytes of flash memory. So that's the storage capacity of a thumb drive. And I've seen ones that are even smaller than that. They're not made to hold files locally. They're really just made to get you onto the internet. And because of that, they require internet access for most of their functions. You can do a very small, limited number of things on a Chromebook if you are not connected to the internet. You can use the offline version of Google Docs, for example, and then as soon as you do connect to the internet, it'll kind of sync up what you have done offline and put it into your online Google account. But other than that, there's really not much you can do with a Chromebook without internet access. So what can you do on a Chromebook? Basically anything you can do online through your web browser, you can do most or all of that from a Chromebook. So obviously the main software of a Chromebook is Google Chrome. It's the Google Chrome web browser, which is often the web browser that we and that IT recommends that people use anyway, just because it's fairly stable, more or less secure-ish, runs well on platforms like Canvas. Office 365 has a web browser-based version of Microsoft Office. So you can access Microsoft Word and PowerPoint and Excel and Outlook through your web browser if you log into your Office 365 account, which all of our students have. They have access to that, although they may not all know that. Google Docs, obviously, that's kind of what a Chromebook is going to try to push you into, is the Google Drive, Google Doc ecosystem. Obviously, you can run Canvas on a Chromebook because it is basically just running it through your Google Chrome browser. You can use I have a little red asterisk on that to remind myself. There is something else that you can enable on Chromebooks, and that is the ability to install and run some, not all, but some Android apps. So the things that you could install on an Android smartphone, you can install some of those programs on a Chromebook if you get into the advanced settings and you turn that on. But we have found, and Jerry, correct me if I'm wrong here, but we have found that some students who have enabled that ability and downloaded and installed the Canvas phone app on their Chromebook have run into some compatibility issues where it does not function the way they expect it to. Is that about right, Jerry?
That's correct. And the biggest issue is with Respondus Lockdown browser.
Yeah. And we'll get to that in a second. I have that on my list. So we have had students trying to use their Chromebook and use the Canvas app on their Chromebook. We do not recommend that. If a student has a Chromebook, they should just use the browser version of Canvas. They should just go to the Canvas login web page and go from there. You can run Zoom off of a Chromebook if you go through the browser version of Zoom, which also has its own limitations because the browser version may not have all of the interactive functions that the desktop version of Zoom has. Nick, you might know a little bit more about the details of that than I do. Does the browser version have all the annotation tools and stuff built into Zoom?
You know, I'm not positive off the top of my head. I think it doesn't, but you know, we'd have to just test that.
Yeah, I know it used to not have all those features. Maybe they've started to enable more of those in the browser version. And I wouldn't be surprised if they did that in response to the popularity of Chromebooks, knowing that more and more people, especially like K-12 students, this is the device they're trying to use.
And I'm seeing that Jared can confirm and so can Ben. So it does look like they've got that functionality.
Yeah. Chromebooks do have cameras built into them. Everyone that I've seen does have a webcam. They're not usually very good webcams. The older Chromebook that I have has a pretty not so great camera, but it works. It functions. It picks up sound. It sees me. It's just kind of low resolution, kind of grainy. You can use the in-browser version of Panopto for recording and editing video. You cannot install the desktop version of Panopto, which has a little more robust features, but you can do Panopto editing in the browser on your Chromebook. And this is something that we should mention. You can use Respondus lockdown monitor on a Chromebook. That used to not be the case. For a long time, Chromebook was not compatible with Respondus whatsoever, which was a real problem if you were using Respondus for your quizzes and you had students on Chromebooks. And then Respondus came out with a beta version of a Chromebook compatible Respondus app that you can kind of opt into and turn on. And now that's just available by the default. So now students on Chromebooks can take quizzes that are Respondus enabled. Whether that's a good idea to do all that or not, I'm not going to get into in this particular session, but it is now Chromebook compatible. And then again, some Android apps with limited functionality are usable on Chromebooks. But I would not recommend counting on that because it's extremely variable as to what will actually work and what won't work on a Chromebook. I'm just looking at the chat here and make sure I didn't miss anything. Had a ton of trouble with Zoom until I switched from Chromebook to Service Tablet. Yeah, so, and maybe I think that has gotten better over the last year or so, but the in-browser version of Zoom on Chromebooks used to be pretty not super functional, didn't have all the features, wasn't incredibly reliable. I think it's gotten better, but it's still sometimes a concern. I have seen that. Okay, so what can't a Chromebook do? Well, they cannot run desktop applications. They can't run any Windows programs. They can't run any Apple programs on the desktop. That especially includes any kind of specialized software. So if you are teaching in a program that uses specialized software like AutoCAD or some kind of medical equipment diagnostic software or electronic diagnostic software or anything like that, it is almost certainly not going to work on a Chromebook unless there is some kind of browser-based version. I know there is kind of a browser-based version of AutoCAD for like drafting and 3D modeling, that sort of thing. But it's kind of pared down. It's not the full featured program. And that's often going to be the case for the specialized software. There's probably not going to be a version that works on a Chromebook. Chromebooks can't store and manage large files because, again, they're not really designed to have a lot of local storage. If they have any storage on them at all, it's going to be a pretty small amount, probably not more than a thumb drive's worth of local storage. So if you are talking about dealing with very big files like video files or lots of audio or tons and tons of pictures or something like that, Chromebook is not going to be very good at storing and managing those files. And then anything that's pretty computer processor intensive is not likely to work very well on a Chromebook, even if it does have a browser version. Because again, these are very pared down, simple machines They don't have a ton of memory. They tend to not have very powerful processors. They don't usually have graphics cards. If you're doing anything with like 3D modeling or rendering or anything fancy like that, Chromebook's not going to cut it. All right, so what are some of the teaching implications when it comes to Chromebooks? Because we know our students are using them because they're cheap, is kind of the bottom line. They're very inexpensive. Students can get a hold of them pretty easily. They very likely had them in K-12 when they were in high school. They probably had Chromebooks. They might still have their Chromebook from high school, and that's what they're using. So we know they're using them whether we like it or not. So the question is, what can we do to accept that, to deal with it, and to hopefully make that experience as manageable and smooth as possible? So the first one I would say is, if your course content does require any kind of specialized software or computer processes, you should set very clear requirements early in the course. I would think of this almost like your textbook requirements for the class. If you are requiring your students to have access to a certain piece of software and it's not available on Chromebooks, your students need to know that right away so that they can make arrangements to have access to that software, make arrangements to have access to a Windows computer if that's what they need. We shouldn't just assume that students will know this. And we'll get to that in a minute here. That's kind of the last thing on my list. So again, setting clear requirements and expectations if you are using any kind of specialized software. Another thing that we see over and over again, not just with Chromebooks, but also with Apple computers, is students struggling to submit homework assignments in the correct file format. Because again, since Chromebooks are designed to be used, they're really designed to use with Google Docs first and foremost. Google Docs is a cloud-based word processor, doesn't really have files per se. It's got a file structure somewhere, but it's all on Google servers. It's not on your local computer. There is an easy way for students to download their Google Docs as a PDF or as a Word document or something like that, and then upload that to Canvas to your assignment folder. But again, we can't assume that all students will know how to do this. And we know from experience that a lot of them don't. They will try to save the file in some weird format, and then you can't, when they try to upload it, either it won't let them upload it at all, or they'll upload their file and then you'll try to open it and it's not compatible with Canvas. We also see this with students on Apple computers if they are using Apple Pages as their word processor, because Pages by default saves their files in a different format, in a .pages format, which is not viewable in Canvas. But again, Apple Pages does allow you to export your documents as a Word document or as a PDF or something like that. Yeah, Ira says, I require them to export PDFs and submit those. It works better for annotations in Canvas. Yeah, I agree. So again, Google Docs and Apple Pages can do this, but students may not know how to do this. So it's probably a good idea, especially in kind of entry-level classes, to include some instructions on how to save your files as a PDF or as a Word document for students that are on Chromebooks and for students that are on Apple products. In the chat in Zoom, I just put a couple of links in there. Those links are also available on the YouTube recording description. Those are super straightforward pages that show you how to export a Google document as a PDF or a Word document, and how to export from Apple Pages to PDF or Word documents. I would recommend that you plop those links into your course information documents in Canvas, or into your syllabus, or into your assignment instructions, or maybe all of the above. If you do that, it's probably going to head off a lot of potential problems for students that may not know how to do these things. I'm just reading through the chat here. Yeah, Jennifer says, I often have students submit files I can't open. I try to restrict the file type, but somehow they still just paste the link to a file. Oh, so one thing that I've seen students do is let's say they have an Apple Pages document on their computer. They try to upload it to Canvas, and it says, oh, this assignment only accepts PDF documents. What the students will try to do is they will open up that, or they will look at that document on their computer desktop, and they'll rename it, and they'll just type in .pdf on the end, thinking that that makes it compatible, and Canvas will let them upload it that way because Canvas is really only looking for that file extension on the name. That does not actually change the file format for that file. It is still a Pages document, and when Canvas tries to open it and render it as a PDF, it doesn't work. Another thing worth thinking about here is considering the option of alternative assignment formats, kind of thinking about using universal design for learning principles here, of giving students some options, some different modalities that they could use to both access content and also to create content. That's going to look different in different courses. UDL is a huge concept, and we do not have time to get deeply into the weeds on that in this particular tech talk. But basically, the idea in a nutshell is to give your students some amount of choice and autonomy and variety and diversity of assignments and content delivery. And the more you do that, the more compatible and accessible your content and your activities will be for all your students, no matter what format, whatever platform they're using, whatever device they're using. UDL makes things more accessible for everybody, and that includes Chromebooks. Ira says, I allow students to do handwritten assignments and then use Microsoft Lens on their phone to digitize and submit. Nice. Ira, you might actually be interested in a tech talk we'll be doing later this month about digital note-taking. And Microsoft Lens will probably be part of that conversation. So stay tuned for that one in the future. The last thing I kind of wanted to cover in the last few minutes here is some of these teaching implications are just one aspect of a larger trend that we are seeing more and more of. And that is probably best articulated in this article that came out a couple of months ago. File Not Found, a generation that grew up with Google is forcing professors to rethink their lesson plans. And I will put a link to that article in the chat. And that should also be available on the YouTube description. But basically, this article talks about this trend where more and more young college students are coming to college without a very strong understanding of computer fundamentals. So oftentimes we tell ourselves, well, these Generation Z students, they're digital natives, right? It means they grew up with technology, they understand technology, they're wizards and professionals at all forms of computing, and they're just ready to roll. And the truth of the matter is that's really not true for many, perhaps most of that generation of students. I just wanted to share the first couple of paragraphs of this article. Catherine Garland, an astrophysicist, started seeing the problem in 2015. She was teaching an engineering course and her students were using simulation software to model turbines for jet engines. She laid out the assignment clearly, but student after student was calling her over for help. They were all getting the same error message: the program couldn't find their files. So Garland thought it would be an easy fix. She asked each student where they'd save their project. Could it be on the desktop, in the shared drive? And over, she was met with confusion. What are you talking about? Not only did the students not know where their files were saved, they didn't understand the question she was asking them. Garland came to the same realization that many of her fellow educators have reached over the last 4 years. The concept of file folders and directories, essential to previous generations' understanding of computers, is gibberish to many modern students. And I don't want to lay the blame on Google, but the proliferation of Google Docs and Google Chromebooks and other products like that are part of this trend, where these students are growing up learning how to use cloud-based software, which is not the same as growing up learning how to use a desktop computer. This is probably best exemplified by just looking at the interface of Google Docs. This is a screenshot of my own Google Docs homepage. If I log into Google Docs, this is what I see. I can see my recent documents that I made. I can see templates for making new documents. There is no file structure immediately available to me. I can kind of look around in here and look for the file structure of Google Docs, but really what Google wants me to do is use the search bar. It's very good at searching for things. So I can type in a phrase, a word, even just a concept, and it's going to find all of my documents that are related to those search terms pretty easily. And I rarely have to go looking for a specific file because it just kind of serves it all up to me as seamlessly and painlessly as possible. But if that is the experience that you grew up with, then you probably don't know how a file structure works. You don't know how a file directory and folders and files and applications and file types and .pdfs and .docxs, you don't know what any of that stuff is because you've never had to learn it. If you grew up on cell phones and Chromebooks, that is not part of your skill set. I'm not saying that's wrong or saying that that's right. It's just kind of the way it is. It's kind of the trend of technology that students are growing up with.
Well, and just to riff on that a little bit, Caleb,
Yeah.
The Google Classroom structure, which many K-12 schools are using, has some sort of organization built in. It organizes by classes. It organizes the permission settings so that they're already taken care of for students with their instructors.
Mm-hmm.
So that's even removing another step that we do expect students to know of how to find their information, how to make sure their permissions are set up, because it's already taken care of that for them behind the scenes.
Yeah. So I mean, when we talk about Gen Z students and we talk about digital natives, it's a dangerous concept because it really does have a potential of leaving those students behind if they don't instantly understand these concepts. They get left behind because we think, surely all of my students understand these things. I shouldn't have to provide any sort of remedial content or links to guides or tutorials about this stuff. Of course, they all know how this works. And we are finding that more and more that is not the case. I think that a lot of that generation of students, they are very tech savvy about certain things. They are very skilled consumers of media, and many of them are very good at creating certain kinds of media, whether it's on TikTok or Instagram or Twitch streaming for video games or live YouTube content creation. Some of them are very good at that stuff, but that doesn't mean they are good at some of this comprehensive desktop computer fundamentals. So I think that that's something that teachers just need to be aware of, and we need to start adapting some of our teaching practices and some of our instructional materials to accept that new reality.
Hey, Caleb.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I can show myself. I'm part of the Get on the Path committee, and we've been talking about how to direct students to resources where they can learn file management skills or they want to have, just in time learning available to the students. And so just a heads up, I don't know if it's an e-learning thing to do, but I don't know who else would be creating the content for these resources. So I have a meeting with them tomorrow, so I'm just going to run that past you guys now. Is that something that e-learning would do, is to create videos, content for just-in-time learning as far as this file management or links that teachers can put into their Canvas shells or, there are all kinds of things that they don't know, and they don't know it until they're supposed to do it.
Yeah.
And so they don't want the students to take a class, but they want them to be able to access the information. So is that something that I should continue to say that maybe e-learning can create the content for that?
That's a great question. I think that we should be involved in that conversation and see if we can help come up with some solutions. I don't know if we would be the ones to create content like that, but I would be willing to bet that there is really good existing content already out there. I don't know that we need to reinvent the wheel on some of this stuff. Maybe it's just about curating and sharing that information in the best possible format.
Right. Okay. Well, I just thought I would check in on that. Like I said, we're meeting tomorrow, and then maybe as we get a little bit more defined as to, also the conversation about where is it going to be housed and all of that. So you may be getting an invite to join that conversation.
Great. Sounds like fun.
Okay, thanks.
And then Ira said in the chat, what you're describing about data organization is an important part of information literacy. Yeah, absolutely. That's part of this conversation is we can't assume that a lot of our college students are coming to us already having significant information literacy skills. We like to think that in high school they are getting some of that education, but I don't know that they always are. And certainly want students that maybe have been outside of high school for a while and are coming to us from other points in their life. They also may need some of those skills that they don't already have. That's all I have for kind of my content. I'm curious if anybody else has experienced any problems kind of specific to students using Chromebooks, anything we haven't already covered, anything that surprised you.
I'll share a little of my experience. The last school I worked at, we gave out, kind of handled 30 or 40 of them, Chromebooks with students who had troubles with their personal computers because we were all paper-free school. And they were the cheapest Chromebooks we could find. They were $199, plus tax.
Yeah.
We rarely had problems with them. Students would have their own accounts. They would take them home overnight. There was never any software, security issues. They'd never download a virus. They're pretty hardy little things for having no cases, and we just give it to them. They rarely failed. I think there's a lot of benefit to that. The Google structure itself makes it easy. It's intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
We'd have students who never really used laptops studying English as a second language, and they were able to kind of pick it up and, learn the icons to what did which sort of task, and they were able to submit assignments and do things well. So I think, end of the day, it does 90% of all the tasks we ask of our students pretty well. It's the 10%, and it's some of the, like you mentioned, it's some of the issues that they're kind of learning some bad habits that we do have higher expectations for. That's kind of the problem.
Yeah. I think that's where some of that just-in-time training can be really helpful to fill in that 10%. Using some of those UDL concepts to allow a variety of formats for assignments can help. Jennifer said earlier in the chat, and it looks like I missed it. She has been using Google Earth in her class. And because so many students are using Chromebook, I didn't really feel comfortable requiring them to download the Google Earth software. So she changed all of her assignments to use the Chromebook web version of Google Earth. Not nearly as good, but it works at a bare minimum. Jennifer, do you want to speak to that any further?
Yep, hang on just 1 second.
Oh, sure, no problem.
I'm still in the lab and students are in there. Yeah, so I basically had to start modifying all of my Google Earth assignments because more and more people were using Chromebooks, and as far as I know, the libraries were also restricting, if a student borrowed the library computer, they were restricting program downloads.
Yeah.
So the original Google Earth is an actual software program that you download and you have sitting on your, like any other program, software program, but Chromebooks are basically app driven and you can't download software on a Chromebook. So just the sheer fact that students couldn't do the homework because they didn't, they were borrowing a Chromebook from somebody, I just I felt like I had to switch them all. Not nearly the best functionality. Like there's so much less functions in the web version of just Google Chrome. But you know, I just had too many students that weren't able to complete the assignments because they could not download the software program.
Yeah.
So I modified and I'm running with it. I mean, hope someday it'll change, but it is what it is right now.
Yeah. That's a and that experience is, I think, a pretty common one for anybody that relies on kind of specialized software rather than just browser-based stuff.
Right.
And I don't know if, you know, if it, I think it's different if you were teaching in a lab setting where you can have all your students in front of Windows desktops that are already pre-installed with everything that they need. In an environment like that, you can make it work. But if you are teaching online students, distant students, or maybe it's a hybrid setting or something like that, and they are doing work on their own personal computers, then yeah, unfortunately, we have to be really careful and cognizant of those limitations.
Yep.
I have just a couple of things to say about that. I have a classroom full of computers, and I'm for my BT 106 Computing Essentials class. And it took me weeks to tell the students, because they would all bring their various devices. And I would say, you have to be using a Windows 10 environment. And they would all get out and open their laptops. I said, no, there's a computer right on the desk in front of you. Use that one. And they are just so attached to using the device that they have, whether it's going to work for them or not. And then my second thing about this is we can adapt so that they can turn in their work here. And I don't know how it's going out in the real world as far as work environment, but are they going to run into file storage, file management, file types? I mean, they're going to have, it seems like they're going to have to know it unless businesses are just going in and setting up their Google for them, like Google Classrooms or something. So I don't know that we are, I mean, it's one thing that we be, adaptive and help them to be able to submit their work where they are. But I think they also need to know it's not going to be like this when you graduate from here and you're going to not know how to save your files.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's especially true for classes that are in specific kind of industries. If you are teaching a business class or an engineering class or electronics class or something, you do need to prepare those students so that they know what to expect when they are on the job in those fields. So they are, hopefully we are training them on the software that industry is currently using. But there's also kind of a balance there. When I got my bachelor's degree in graphic design, we spent a whole year learning Adobe Flash and how to program in Adobe Flash and how to design in it, how to build websites using Adobe Flash. Adobe Flash doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't work anymore. So the specific software skill set that we spent a year learning is gone. What I still use is the fundamental design principles and concepts about design. Those things I can adapt to any piece of software, any system that comes along. So I think there has to be kind of a balance there between preparing them for the specific tools that are currently in use in industry, but also kind of giving them the tools to adapt to new systems as they go along. Because there's always a danger of preparing them for the last decade's tools when we really need them to be ready for whatever the next decade's tools are that haven't been created yet.
And even CCS is becoming more cloud-based, and we're going to be one of the slowest companies, institutions to adapt.
Yeah. Great conversation, though. I don't know what the right answer is for finding that balance, but I think that it's a conversation we need to keep having, and we need to keep asking ourselves in the specific content areas that we're teaching in as well.
And it's a wide variety depending upon the size of the business and the type of the business, as you said, because I was just talking to someone last weekend who just started using a ribbon structure for her Word and is really struggling. And this was at her job that they just updated their Word and just started using a ribbon structure. So that's been since 2010, I think.
Yeah.
So there are smaller businesses out there that aren't doing those things.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think we are past time here. But it's a great conversation. Donna, definitely please keep us in mind as you have those conversations about that just-in-time computer literacy training. Maybe we can be part of that conversation. But I have to run to another meeting in the next couple of minutes. So I'm going to end our live.
Cameron, did you have a question?
Well, I just wanted to say that it is so easy on the Chromebook and in Google Suite in general to save multiple copies of the same thing. Giving your students a little guidance on file structure and organization, because this is what we do in all of everything we do is data organization.
Some of them are hilarious.
Some of them are, well, to me, they look like they're in 6th grade and they just dropped their Trapper Keeper on the floor. And if you can help them a little bit on the data organization on their hard drive or on their cloud, it's a good thing.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. Hopefully that was a useful conversation. Hopefully some of those links that we shared might be helpful resources for you. And we will see you next week.
Thank you.
All right.